Film noir is a genre about failure, flawed anti-heroes that exert everything and end up changing nothing, or making everything worse. In 2017, German television gifted us with a powerful exploration of the noir genre with a historical twist. This most inward and highly personal genre was given the most intense and terrifying political focus imaginable. Instead of pounding the pavement of a post-war American city, we traverse the cultural despair of the German Weimar Republic's fall from peace and democracy. That series, currently the best television program on anywhere in the world, is Babylon Berlin. If you're new to the series and want an introduction to the first 3 seasons, please watch the video I made linked here. Or for a quicker overview, Babylon Berlin is a noir mystery series about Gerion Rath, a Berlin-based homicide detective with severe PTSD from World War I, and his love interest Charlotte Ritter, a former escort turned detective as they navigate the treacherous underbelly of political gangsterism in the last years of the doomed Weimar Republic. A year has passed since the end of Season 3. Germany, along with the rest of the capitalist world, is sunk in the depths of the Great Depression. The Reich's citizenry, already barely coping with the struggles of poverty in the so-called golden years of the late 20s, are groaning under the burden of hunger and joblessness. There is open talk even among the glittering heights of society that the barely 10-year-old republic must be strangled and replaced by dictatorship.
Herr Brüning sind seit 9 Monaten Reichskanzler. In dieser Zeit haben Sie mit den republikanischen Wirrungen unseres Landes gründlich aufgeräumt. Es war uns eine Freude und das ist es auch immer noch.
Our 2 protagonists are struggling to resist the increasingly blurry mixture of everyday street thugs and politicized fanatics eager to exploit the Depression.
Absetzen.
Gerion is named after Saint Gerion, a Roman legionary from Cologne, Germany. His namesake was martyred by beheading after he refused to sacrifice to Rome's pagan deities. Gerion fits well into the noir archetype of the paladin, a man who absolutely refuses to compromise to the corruption of evil, and who is typically destroyed by it. While representing an ancient chivalric honor, Gerion is an extremely modern figure. He served in the blood and mud of the trenches in the final year of the Great War. Since then, his mind has been haunted by fear and nightmares, eased only by a severe morphine addiction. He's willing to put his life in danger every day to end the drive towards another world war. Since his move to Berlin from Cologne, the Social Democratic police chief recognized his talents and recruited Gerion to subvert and break up the vicious cliques of right-wing extremists, eating the Republic away from within.
Ich tue es im Geheimauftrag des Berliner Polizeipräsidenten. Er hat mich bei der SA platziert, um das Vertrauen ihres Anführers zu gewinnen. Wir wollen die SA spalten, mit dem Ziel, die NSDAP zu kriminalisieren und sie dann aufzulösen.
In Season 4, Gerion's political work has led him to an undercover role in the heart of the beast, the Sturmabteilung, or the stormtroopers of the NSDAP.
SA marschiert! Die Reihen dicht geschlossen! Worauf wartet ihr noch, Kameraden? Nieder mit der SS und dem Verräterpack aus München! Heil dem Oberführer von Berlin! Heil Stennes!
A recreation of a real-life attempt by the ruling Social Democratic Party to undermine and split the NSDAP, and eventually lead to the banning of the party by inflaming its most volatile elements. In doing this, Gerion has to work with the loathsome Stennis, a vicious and radical SA thug, who is unconcerned with his Führer's path of legality.
Der Befehl aus München ist ganz eindeutig. Die Beteiligung der SA an Straßenkämpfen hat zu unterbleiben.
Der obergefreite Hitler mag sich dem Diktat des Systems unterordnen, ich nicht, wir marschieren.
And wants to use the right-wing element to a true revolutionary end.
Nicht die Partei ist die Führung der Bewegung. Nein, wir sind es, die SA!
By brutalizing people on the streets, breaking shop windows, intimidating journalists,
Polizei, bitte! Polizei! Bitte, schnell! Ein Kudamm kommt an Mord! Das ist die SA! Kommen Sie schnell!
He's the uncontrollable tip of the spear of fascism, and Garion has to play a dangerous game of making the already out-of-control SA even more uncontrollable, in the hopes that it will become repugnant to the average citizens of Germany and lead to calls for its banning. Babylon Berlin brilliantly shows the multifaceted directions of attack that led to the Untergang of the Republic. Rather than a single lion in the form of the NSDAP, they are about the alpha and a pack of wolves, all with their own reasons for reveling in the eradication of freedom. Instead of a single driving plot, each episode is a massive spider's web of strands, pulling each character closer and closer to the spider at the center. While SA thugs threaten the city, the criminal Polizei must also contend with a gangster war drenching the streets in blood.
Extrablatt, Extrablatt! Bandenkrieg bricht aus in Berlin!
Berlin versinkt im Gangsterblut! Maschinengewehr Feuer! Spendausgabe! Brutale Morde in Kreuzberg!
Or at least that's how the sensationalist press of the day would characterize it. A mysterious force is slaughtering criminals left and right, causing the gangsters to engage in even more bloodshed. While that's an issue in itself, the real trouble comes from the extreme right, who use any crime to denounce the Republic as weak, pathetic, immoral, a cancerous blob that can only be cleansed with force. The overarching topic of Season 4 is law and order, one of the less thrilling aspects of totalitarianism.
Dann hat soeben an diesem Ort die Demontage unseres Rechtsstaats begonnen. Es scheint sich eine Verlagerung der Kräfteverhältnisse in den Hinterzimmern dieser Gemäuer zu vollziehen, die unserer freiheitlichen Gesellschaft das Fundament entzieht.
What do you do when a large proportion of the citizenry simply have no respect whatsoever for the rule of law, or Rechtsstaat as it's called in German? Communists despise the state as tools of capitalist oppression, while those same capitalist oppressors think the state is too lenient with strikers and unions, who need a good beating. Well, the deadliest of all is the silent majority, millions of ordinary citizens in the middle class who will never accept the Weimar Republic as the legitimate representative of the German people.
Ich versuche zu ergründen, warum wir innerhalb von einer halben Stunde juristisch zurück ins Mittelalter gefallen sind.
Männer, die versuchen, den Pöbel gegen unsere Streitkräfte aufzuwiegeln, haben an diesem Gerichtshof schlechte Karten, Herr Anwalt.
They may not be actively plotting its overthrow, but they refuse to render aid even in the most dire struggles. Amongst the bourgeois who are actively plotting to overthrow are the men in charge of the Weiße Hand, the White Hand Society, a group of extremist right-wing judges and lawyers, seething with hatred for any perceived leniency towards criminals.
Von der Existenz der Weißen Hand hatte er keine Ahnung, dem wahren Gericht, das in diesen Hallen hier tagt, um all die Schlupflöcher zu schließen, durch die Ungeziefer wie dieses seit Jahren schlüpfen kann.
Even the pettiest of petty criminals, like a 12-year-old boy stealing food to avoid starvation, are given the most barbaric sentences.
Dort hat der Junge die größten Chancen auf eine gelungene Reintegration.
Aber wer sagt, dass wir fehlgeleitete Jugendliche reintegrieren wollen? Ich möchte Sie darauf hinweisen, das ist hier ein Vormundschaftsgericht und nicht der Parteitag der Sozialdemokraten.
The darkest truth of authoritarianism is not the obvious threat of jackbooted thugs beating, shouting, and threatening people. It's the little people behind the vanguard, the masses of respectable citizens that form the foundation, the vicious spear point of stormtroopers need to live. A great moment passes so quickly you may have missed it. Inside the SA meeting hall, we pan by a group of women, not usually the people we think of when considering street violence. Yet they are vital to the machine, providing food, making flags, mending uniforms, all in their own time and probably as volunteers for this evil cause. And this is all during the suffering of the Depression. What motivates these otherwise normal people to provide succor to violence, cruelty, and destruction? They are the sinews of hatred. Horror is a genre about monsters, but film noir is about the putrid swamp the monsters live in. We already know the atrocities committed by the party from Munich. This is about the world that let them get away with it. As Garion soon finds out in his personal life, there may be an answer to the emotional underpinning of atrocity. Fear. Angst, terror at the self and the other, is the fuel powering the darkness. Personal issues come to the fore as motivations for all characters. It's not just world historical forces. Chance, accident, and emotion shape things just as much as dialectics. And the clash between the two comes up again and again. Take the case of Fraulein Siegers. Mary Louise Siegers is the daughter of General Siegers, the head of the rump German armed forces. While her father plots the downfall of democracy, Siegers is the archetypical class traitor who supports communism in a rebellion against her own class heritage.
Ich will für dich und unsere Sache kämpfen, notfalls bis zum Tod.
But her loyalties shift moment to moment when personal feelings get in the way. She has been involved romantically with the odious Colonel Wendt, the head of the Berlin political police. Initially, this is purely to infiltrate and spy on the openly fascist Wendt. But over time, she develops real feelings for him.
Wir könnten weg.
Könnten wir?
Weg von hier. Der Politik, allem.
Complicating her mission to lead him to his assassination by communist forces. She claims to be willing to surrender her life for the party and the cause, but always hesitates when it comes right down to hurting others. Another woman whose feelings get in the way of her job is Gerion's love interest, Charlotte Ritter. She is a powerful woman who clawed her way up from sex work in the secretarial pool to be an assistant homicide detective, the first woman to hold the post. Lotte fends off the sexist disdain from some of her traditionalist colleagues for years, until a family matter gets in the way. Her sister Toni, once a sweet young girl, has become a roaming street urchin stealing to earn a living. While Toni is robbing a department store, a group of corrupt cops working for the White Hand murder her partner and threaten to kill Toni herself to cover up the crime. Gerion's nephew Morris saves Toni by killing one of the White Hand cops.
Geh zur Straße! Los, mach!
But this ends up in Toni being dragged in for murder. When Toni is arrested, Charlotte attempts to free her and is observed by another detective secretly destroying evidence that pins Toni to the crime. The world of Babylon Berlin is a set of stunning contrasts. Titans of industry and starlets dance to scandalous jazz music, while millions of desperate poor pay a few pfennigs to sleep sitting up, leaning on a rope in a dingy bar. And underpinning everything are the millions of men, mutilated in body and less obviously in mind or spirit, from the Great War, hobbling through life, demanding that it was all worth something, that their continued suffering must mean something. Charlotte's actions are understandable, but she's still committed criminal offenses and is promptly fired.
Sie haben mit dem Mantel eindeutig belastendes Material zur Seite geschafft, um den Verdacht von Ihrer Schwester abzulenken, was ich bewiesen habe. Und seien Sie versichert, die Fluchthilfe im Fall Ihrer Schwester werde ich Ihnen auch noch nachweisen.
Her dreams of detective work are shattered and she returns to the gutter. These scenes do a remarkable job of showing the grinding horror of poverty, an eternal flame of suffering compelling millions into extremes of left and right, or numb apathy for anything but their own hunger. Charlotte, even when she has full-time employment, has to share a room and a bed with a bartender. To make money, she decides to return to Mocha FT, her former sex worker club, to compete in a dance marathon. Even with chemical help, she can't dance for 48 hours or more and succumbs to exhaustion.
Tanz, als dein Leben. Es braucht nur einen Wimpernschlag. Und alles war vergebens.
It's an odd break in the mystery story, but does help showcase the mad desperation of the times. People are dancing away their lives to try and forget their troubles. Madly exhausting themselves for hours is the only way to forget the horrors of day-to-day life in the Depression. It also reminds us of the ultimate failure of all of our characters to stop the tide of evil lurking beneath everything. It's a horrible fear penetrating all actions. what German historian Joachim Fest called the Great Dread of Weimar. The German Medical Society declared neurosis a national epidemic in the 1920s. But the ultimate cause was not modernity itself, it was a terrible reaction to trauma. The trauma of war, defeat, and depression empowered what a historian has called the politics of cultural despair, the notion that all was ruined. Nothing matters anymore in the industrial slaughter of Verdun or the Somme, and a nihilistic disdain for danger and the self was the only road to liberation. Gerion and Charlotte do team up to investigate the murder of several homeless children.
Laut diesen Unterlagen starben mindestens 21 obdachlose Jugendliche während oder in unmittelbarer Folge von Festnahmen. 12 weitere Fälle wurden laut Akten nachträglich als Unfall eingestuft.
Charlotte's courage, determination, and charisma lead her to the doors of the White Hand. In a gripping action sequence, she seizes control of the group at gunpoint and demands they stop the farcical trial of a traitor to the movement.
Tür! Weg von der Tür! Hinsetzen! Ich hab 2 davon! 2 mal 8 Kugeln! 16 von euch krieg ich! Wir werden jetzt hier warten!
Being shot while trying to escape, by the way, was a common euphemism for murder during the Third Reich. Quite apart from the thrilling action and violence are the mundane evils undermining law in Germany. Gerion has been diligently working for the past 3 seasons to expose the secret rearmament of the German military.
Die Reichswehr hat die ihr vom Versailler Vertrag auferlegten Beschränkungen systematisch umgangen. Dies war schon vor der Veröffentlichung der Artikel meiner Mandanten allgemein bekannt, auch im Ausland.
His exposé was finally published by left-wing journalists, but they were almost immediately arrested and charged with treason. Their defense at trial was led by Hans Litten, a real-life communist lawyer who became famous for prosecuting stormtroopers for political violence. He even had the temerity to hold the Führer himself in as a witness, subjecting him to the indignity of cross-examination about his evil activities. But the judiciary in Weimar was deeply flawed. Most of the judges at the time were product of the pre-war Wilhelmine Empire, and saw the Republic as an unwanted imposition. Few right-wing thugs were successfully given appropriately harsh sentences, while left-wingers who merely published articles with secret documents were brutally hounded and given severe punishment.
Hier sollen doch keine militärischen Geheimnisse verhandelt werden. Es geht hier um illegale Machenschaften hochrangiger Militärs, die die Republik gefährden. Nicht um Gefahren, die von der freien Presse ausgehen.
Herr Anwalt, auch Sie haben dem Gericht Folge zu leisten.
Und Sie der Verfassung unserer Republik!
There are clear parallels to events here in the 21st century United States, where leaking evidence of war crimes is brutally punished and most popular anger is directed at the supposed traitor rather than the criminal military. The gradual introduction of fascism is a slow burn of unstoppable evil, not a sudden explosion of terror. What's most shocking about this anarchy is that every character, minor and major, police, lawyers, and judges from political left and right, is willing to break the law for their own purposes. The police enforcers of the law are filled with men openly disdainful of freedom, and eager to do battle for the ultranationalist right.
Wie konnte er einer Hundertschaft der SS Polizeiwaffen aushändigen? Er hat sie in einen illegalen Einsatz geschickt. Und niemand hier hat sich ihm in den Weg gestellt.
The communists wage a covert terror campaign against fascists. Even Gerion, our hero, claims to be unwilling to treat with criminals.
Wir brauchen Hilfe, Herr Kommissar. Wir brauchen einen Vermittler, dem jeder traut. Der alle an einen Tisch bringt. Alle führenden Persönlichkeiten der Berliner Ringvereine und Syndikate.
Wie kommen Sie dann auf die abwegige Idee, dass ich mit Ihnen zusammenarbeiten könnte? Ausgerechnet ich. Bewegen Sie sich.
But then instantly changes his mind when he can gain something from it.
Ich mache keine Geschäfte mit Mördern und Verbrechern.
Ich erlöse dich von deiner Qual. Von der Quelle deiner Angst. Ich befreie dich von deiner Pein.
Ich will dabei sein. Ich muss es sehen.
The gangster war causing so much death in the city is brought to an end by unorthodox means. On the prompting of one of the gangsters, Gerion arranges for all of the bosses to meet at the police station for a secret roundtable discussion. Instead of bringing about peace, Gerion is tricked by the thug, who takes his revenge on the whole group. In a normal society, this never would have happened. Gangsters and police do not work with each other. The cops don't sponsor peace talks with safety guaranteed. But this is not a healthy society. And that's why the gangster segments are so important to the overall story. They're a metaphor for what the state is doing with the infinitely more important political story. The forces of law and order are weak and venal. Instead of crushing gangsterism or stormtroopers, the police thinks they can somehow control them, work with them to bring about a peaceful solution. This is exactly what happens later on when the NSDAP, far from seizing power as they claim, are levered into power by orthodox politicians who arrogantly thought they can tame the beast. A theme that pops up again and again in the show is the surprising symbol of the moon.
Größer als alle anderen Nationen! Wir werden die Ersten sein auf dem Mond!
For most of the 20th century, we associate space travel with huge populous superpowers like Russia and the USA, and later on in the 21st century, China and India. But a century ago, the nation most likely to win the space race was Germany. All of the greatest rocket scientists and physicists were German. Only the rise of fascism and the war led dozens of important scientists to flee to the West. The few that remained were co-opted not to go to the moon, a laudable goal, but for evil.
Wir müssen. Deutschland wird eine Pionierleistung erbringen, wenn wir die erste Nation sind, die Raketen solcher Art entwickelt. Sie könnten sie ganz legal entwickeln, da sie durch den Schandvertrag von Versailles nicht geächtet sind.
Sie meinen, Raketen könnten uns wieder groß machen?
Until then, it was a dream of German science to reach outer space. If they had done this, and they had the means to do so, it would have been the greatest scientific coup in the history of humanity, just as it was decades later for America and the USSR. It's a tragedy that Germany abandons that dream in pursuit of meaningless violence and restoring the lost greatness of German political power.
Paris wird brennen, London wird brennen und eines Tages auch New York.
Leading this drive is the eccentric Alfred Nissen, heir to a mighty steel production empire with close ties to right-wing extremists. But his rocket toys are diverted from peaceful scientific exploration to the brutal exertion of force over Germany's enemies. In the first episode, a huge banner of the moon is covered up by a racist slogan. Germany had a peaceful road to future greatness and surrendered it all to militarist bilge and war trauma. Returning to the White Hand, anyone even vaguely paying attention to politics will know that being soft on crime holds massive currency with millions of people, especially in the United States, to this very day. Even in popular entertainment over the past 5 years, there are now hundreds of true crime YouTube channels and podcasts that thunder at supposedly light sentences for criminals. This yearning for punishment is a sick thrill in every human soul down to this very day. If you're unconvinced by the connection between arch-conservative tough-on-crime talk and fascism, take a look at the actions of the Führer himself. When he came to power, he did exactly what the White Hand did: sit around reading the newspaper in the morning and work himself up into a towering rage, fulminating about soft sentences for criminals. He would order the SS to pick up convicts the instant their sentence in regular jail was over and throw them into a concentration camp.
Kurzer Prozess und dann.
The White Hand is the Führer's vile subconscious urge to assert personal, tyrannical control over allegedly subhuman criminal elements.
Auf Barbarei folgt Ordnung.
Auf Barbarei folgt Ordnung.
Auf Schwäche folgt Stärke.
Auf Schwäche folgt Stärke.
This is the more boring side of the history of atrocity for many people. None of the pornography of violence that thrills edutainment seekers. But Babylon Berlin carefully untangles the 15-year-long disdain for police, judiciary, civil servants, lawyers, the entire apparatus. Weimar Germany has been called a republic without republicans. This isn't exactly accurate, but it's impossible not to notice substantial parts of the German people simply never accepted democracy as anything but an intrusion forced on them that one day would be destroyed. There were countless institutional and constitutional faults in Germany after the Great War, but all of them would have been trivial without an overwhelming lack of belief and legitimacy in the state itself. A vicious desire to brutalize criminals was most clearly explained when Dr. Goebbels, the propaganda minister in the Third Reich, misinterpreted the first film noir ever made, the 1931 classic M by Fritz Lang. Fabulous, against the humanity rubbish, for the death penalty, well made, Lang will be our director someday. The movie is dense and murky about ultimate meanings, but like Babylon Berlin, it's a story about the underworld connection between cops and crooks, and the blurring of lines between the two. Reminiscent of The White Hand is the conclusion, when the entire criminal underworld puts the serial killer, played by Peter Lorre, on trial for his life.
Ausgerechnet, damit du dich auf den Paragraph 51 berufst und dein Leben lang auf Staatskosten verpflegt wirst. Und dann brichst du aus, und es kommt eine Amnestie, und du, vergnügt, mit Jagdschein kann ja nichts passieren, bist ja wegen Unzurechnungsfähigkeit gesetzlich geschützt.
As Goebbels mentioned, they despise any modern notions of psychological explanations for criminal acts and favor brutal, swift judgment. But it's telling that Goebbels' opinion is being echoed not by the police in the film, but by vicious, brutal thugs, something he didn't seem to notice or care about. And no punches are pulled in Babylon Berlin either about the White Hand's victims. They are serious criminals, and it's easy to get angry at a light sentence of a few years for a serious crime like murder. The White Hand even murders the heinous criminal who abused Charlotte's sister Toni in Season 3.
Aber die Tür, die lässt du auf.
Further graying the audience's reaction to the secret society, forcing us to ask if we would ever sympathize with something so grotesque, if it affected us personally.
Ein gnadenloser, unbarmherziger Amtsrichter, dem kein Urteil zu hart sein kann. Immer strafend, nur strafend, nie verzeihend, nie fragend.
I was unable to find anything with an exact historical similarity to the White Hand, but there were certainly extrajudicial political murders called Femmermord in 1920s Germany. Most were done by extremists punishing so-called betrayers of the fatherland. There was even a group called the Black Hand who murdered at least one woman for supporting the French occupation authorities in the Ruhr. Even Hans Litten, who appears in the show as a champion for law, was not such a clear-cut figure in the real world. He coached proletarian witnesses before trial in large groups, so it appeared that they would all have the same story in a case. Litten even decided later on to work alongside the odious Stennis, the SA thug, after he was expelled from the NSDAP, in order to get back at the Fuhrer. Obviously a laudable goal to fight against the NSDAP, but it's contemptuous of the law itself, and it shows a willingness to work with evildoers, instead of shunning them completely. Babylon Berlin returns to the story of the dissident stormtrooper Stennis in the final episode. The Northerners plan on expelling the Fuhrer from the party in a coup against Dr. Goebbels' newspaper Der Angriff.
Soeben wurde mir berichtet, dass der gefreite Hitler vom Vorsitz der Partei zurückgetreten ist. Dieser österreichische Emporkömmling ist Geschichte!
It comes close to succeeding until Wendt, chief of the political police, arms SS guards with police weapons and leads them into an attack on the SA.
Ihr wollt es, die sich gegenseitig zerfleischen. Stennis soll die Macht an sich reißen. Weil keiner ist, der wie Hitler die Massen mobilisiert.
The stormtroopers quickly surrender and the Fuhrer's reign is reassured. If only Fraulein Siegers had shown more guts, then Wendt would be dead and this never would have happened. Purged of dissident SA elements, police spies exposed, and the SS given free rein by the cops to murder political enemies at will, the party emerges triumphant and stronger than ever. But not everything is darkness. At least some personal relationships flourish while the world burns. Garion and Charlotte finally get together and enjoy each other's company. Again and again, in fact.
Keiner? Oder nur eine kleine?
Eine kleine Weile ohne eine? Meinst du?
Charlotte has finally reunited with her sister, old enmities forgiven and forgotten. Garion's nephew Moritz leaves the SA, finally, and goes off with Tony to explore the country together, maybe a new romance between them blossoming. All of them are going to need unshakable friends and partners to survive the storm coming over the next 2 years, but they focus on today, not tomorrow's storm clouds.
Morgen ist morgen, jetzt ist jetzt, und jetzt will ich tanzen.
Gut. It's a much happier motto than the more common wartime saying, Krieg ist Krieg, und Schnaps ist Schnaps. Along with the budding romance, there is another storyline that doesn't fit in with the overall gloom of the times. This season is based on the book Goldstein, named after the Jewish-American gangster-slash-businessman Avram Goldstein. Abe Gold, as he's known in New York, is returning to his family's homeland on a quest for revenge. Nissen the Rocket Man owns a magnificent one-of-a-kind diamond called the Blue Rothschild, based on a real-world missing jewel owned by a famous Jewish banking family. The diamond, destined for a Berlin synagogue, is stolen from Goldstein's father during World War I, and Abe's determined to get it back. Using his thuggish talents, Abe terrorizes the Nissen family by kidnapping Nissen's wife and mother. The interactions between her and Nissen's cold-hearted, villainous mother are delightfully funny.
Angst? Davor. Den Friedhof schleichst und meinen Namen vom Grabstein kratzt.
Der war gut. Das muss ich dir lassen, Mädchen.
Eventually, Abe gets the diamond back and returns to America having avenged his father. But too much of this story is just implausible. Abe can enter the Nissen mansion at will, knows how to find a secret location for storing his victims, and is pretty much physically invincible.
Noch jemand, der verhaut werden will von einem Juden?
It doesn't jibe with the film noir universe where everyone is supposed to be flawed and vulnerable. I can see why they wanted to show his character symbolically fighting back against the racists, and I enjoyed seeing him spend a lovely evening in a traditional Jewish household with relatives, but Goldstein is too strong without the inevitable screw-ups you expect from the genre. Even if he is the title character, Goldstein is likely the weakest of all his stories. But it does show the continuity of anti-Semitism predating the interwar period, something often forgotten in the list of vile crimes of the 20s, 30s, and 40s. The gangster storyline ends not with Garion's dismissal for gross negligence, but being feted as a hero.
Berlin atmet auf. Durch einen wahrhaft meisterlichen Coup gelang es der Kriminalpolizei in der letzten Nacht, die Stadt aus dem Würgegriff der Ringvereine zu befreien, deren brutalstes Gebaren anständige Bürger jüngst derart in Angst und Schrecken versetzt hatte, dass sie sich kaum mehr auf die Straße trauten.
The paper thanking the police is not a bloodthirsty rag like Der Angriff. It's the left-wing Morgen Post, one of the most read papers in Germany, and owned by the highly respected and Jewish Ulstein Publishing House.
Sie folgen dem Ethos des Polizisten, Gennard. Ja. Geradlinig. Prinzipientreu. Und ich stimme Ihnen zu. Allerdings kann man die Dinge auch politisch betrachten und genau das ist meine Aufgabe.
All of society was struck by contempt for the law itself. The action is approved of by the Social Democratic police president, and Garion is lauded by his colleagues and prevented from resigning. Terror of crime leads to hatred, which unfulfilled turns to volcanic rage at everyone and everything.
Die SA randaliert am Kudamm.
Na und?
Es sind viele. Die machen Jagd auf Zivilisten.
Das fällt nicht in unsere Zuständigkeit.
It's fitting to call this time period the Depression, because it's exactly that emotional plunging into the abyss that causes violent outbursts, apathy, and inner and outer directed hatred. But no one, no political party, no religion, no movement anywhere is hearing these sick minds. Babylon Berlin is a world where the lunatics are running the asylum. Speaking of asylums, it's time to talk about the most mysterious but most important of subjects. Garion's therapy with his estranged brother, Dr. Schmidt, which serves as a symbol for what's going on in society as a whole. Initially, Schmidt was helping to break the morphine addiction that was ruining Garion's life. But by season 4, his treatment has morphed into something far darker. Schmidt has been attempting to utterly destroy Garion's fear, to mold him into the new man authoritarian regimes are so fond of.
Und zwar ohne, dass sich natürliche Impulse oder Blockaden dem Drang zur Konfrontation entgegenstellen. Das Objekt überschätzt sich bis zur Selbstauslöschung.
Breaking down the loathsome mass of humanity by an overwhelming strongman. Just take a look at these political cartoons from the early 30s. You would be forgiven for thinking these are 4 posters from the same party, but they aren't. 4 parties have their own version of essentially the same poster. A great man crushing and molding the mewling hordes into a mighty warrior. Even the supposedly liberal Social Democrats were tapping into the psychology of fear erasure through submission to a greater will. Geryon is injected with large doses of Pervitin, a drug developed in the interwar years. You may know it under its more common name. Later during the Third Reich, Pervitin was sold over the counter, unbelievably, to a society hungry for aggression and a feeling of invincibility. It was even given in large doses to the soldiers fighting the blitzkriegs that characterized German successes in the early years of the war. Without fear, Geryon is able to abandon any sense of self-preservation and battle furiously against much larger opponents. At the cost of his sanity and his soul. It's not hard to see the desires of the militarists to lead the comparatively small nation of Germany against vastly larger nations like the US and Soviet Union. That kind of crazed ultra-confidence underpinned much of the Führer's activity for years. He was also prescribed Pervitin by his personal doctor. It's controversial how much it affected his decision-making, but it's hard to believe it had no effect, especially after he became virtually addicted to it after 1942. Geryon is only willing to explore the wickedness of helping gangsters because he thinks it will free him from his brother's psychological tendrils. Geryon seems like an entirely different person at night. His character slips into a kind of hypnosis of obedience to his brother's crazed wishes. It's the subconscious rising above the surface and drowning the stolid ego and moralist superego. Only when darkness falls does it come out to play.
Ich habe keine Angst mehr. Die Quelle meiner Angst. Sie ist versiegt.
Komm und sieh.
What is Schmidt's ultimate goal? What is he planning for his army of the mutilated? His words to Geryon are, "Come and see," perhaps an ominous reference to the Book of Revelation, and coincidentally the title of a Soviet film about German war crimes made in 1985, which I highly recommend everyone watch. Geryon's opioid is replaced with Pervitin. The doctor wants to replace the opium of the masses with the stimulant of politics.
Bist du bereit, sie zu führen?
Italian fascists call the conclusion of World War I the mutilated victory. A German doctor, Gerhard Orzechowski, claimed he wanted to turn man into a beast of prey, to seize his countrymen and push their souls down into primal, violent instinct.
A fast trip straight down the ladder, right to the primal fear, right to the base anger. I'm telling you, man, it was powerful.
We don't know what will become of Geryon and his new army of the mutilated. Can he put it to good purpose, or will it be the harbinger of violence leading to world war? Whatever happens, the underworld of the mind is going to exert some kind of primal energy for or against Geryon and Charlotte. They can't ignore or forget the trauma of the war and the diseased minds it produced, especially when the doctors supposedly helping them are twisting trauma into their own bid for power. We know the tragic conclusion to their efforts, but perhaps some hope can still be found in the ultimate triumph of good over evil, at least in the inner soul, if not in reality.